Good afternoon. I'm Ces Butner, and I have the pleasure of serving as this year's president of Rotary Club of Oakland. Founded in 1908, the Rotary Club of Oakland is the third oldest Rotary Club of some 35,000 Rotary clubs throughout the world. We are a community of 300 men and women from all walks of Oakland's civic, commercial, and community life, committed to the Rotary motto of service above self. I'd like to welcome you to our 5,323rd club meeting. For over 111 years, we have welcomed Rotarians and guests from around the world to our club meetings. We have continued to do so virtually, so if you're a visiting Rotarian, or if you're a guest of a Rotarian, please let us know by typing your name and the name of your club into the chat box located at the center bottom of your screen, as indicated by the red arrow on the slide you're viewing now. By doing so, we will be able to recognize you later in this meeting. Also, we recommend that all participants view this Zoom meeting by clicking the speaker view button located in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. And if you have comments throughout the meeting or questions for the speaker, please use the chat button at the bottom of the screen for that as well. And now for our thought for the day, Rotarian and former ED, Pat Williams.
Thank you, President Ces. This Monday, we will honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He had wise words on many topics, and I encourage you to read the text of his major speeches, which remain as relevant as ever. Today, I share two of his quotes regarding service. Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? And the next, not everybody can be famous, but everybody can be great, because greatness is determined by service. You only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love.
Thank you, Pat. That's perfect. Because we want to remain grounded and focused, we begin our meetings by jointly reciting our vision, which is, together we see a world where people unite and take action to create lasting change across the globe, in our communities, and in ourselves. I hope you enjoyed last week's meeting when we emphasized our history of women in Rotary and heard from some of our longtime women members. In addition, we heard from Mayor Libby Sheff, who brought us up to date on the state of the city and promised to meet with us to discuss our homeless efforts. To that end, this week, we will update you on our emphasis this year, the homeless efforts, which we didn't have time to do last week, and hear from the Sorority Lena Committee. In addition, this week's Civic Thursday's speaker will follow up on the mayor's state of the city with kind of polling results from the city. So sit back and enjoy another great Civic Thursday meeting where you can catch a great speaker and get involved with Rotary, where service above self exists. But first, as this is MLK holiday weekend, here to speak about it is past President Charlie Adams. Charlie.
Unmute, Charlie.
Unmute yourself, Charlie. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Fine. Monday, January 18th is a federal holiday honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In 1983, the U.S. Congress passed legislation making Dr. King's birthday a national holiday. The first nationwide celebration of MLK Jr. holiday occurred in 1986. The holiday is now celebrated each year on the third Monday of January. In November 1996, Congress passed legislation proposing the establishment of a memorial in Washington, D.C. to honor Dr. King. The site selected for the memorial was a 4-acre plot in West Potomac Park, adjacent to the National Mall, and approximately halfway between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument. Upon completion of the memorial in 2011, the official address was recorded as 1964 Independence Avenue. The significance of this address is that it was in 1964 that Congress passed the Civil Rights Act that outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, national origin, and later also sexual orientation and gender identity. It prohibits unequal application of voter registration requirements and prohibits racial segregation in schools and public accommodations. Dr. King was a champion of this legislation. The Roma Design Group of San Francisco was selected to design the memorial. The dominant structure in the memorial is the entrance portal, which consists of two pink granite pillars standing over 30 feet high, representing a mountain with the center section removed to provide stone for a sculpture of Dr. King. The inscription on the side of the structure reads, "Out of the mountain of despair, a stone of hope." This inscription is inspired by a passage from Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech, in which he states, "I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low. This is the faith with which I return to the South. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope." Surrounding the King sculpture is a 450-foot-long inscription wall containing 14 quotes from Dr. King. These quotes reflect the four principles for Dr. King's crusade: justice, democracy, hope, and love. President Ces, I want to thank you for your allotment of program time to recognize the King holiday and for allowing me to focus our attention on the King Memorial. The memorial was funded by $120 million in private money, donated not just by African Americans, but by individuals, foundations, and corporations of many colors and political persuasions. These Americans shared the dreams, the faith, and the love of America, exemplified by the life of Dr. King. The Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. National Memorial belongs to all Americans. May our homage to Dr. King provide us with the resolve and strength to rise above the despair of today and to march forward to tomorrow with hope and love. Thank you.
Thank you, Past President Charlie, for those poignant comments about MLK Day. Past District Governor Ed Jelen, do we have any visiting Rotarians or guests?
Yes, hi, President Ces. Thank you. And thank you also for allowing me 30 seconds to make a little pitch and give people a heads up, because an issue of our district TRF newsletter, TRF News Today, is going to be coming out Monday. And guess who gets a big shout out in that newsletter? And that's our very own President Ces on the front page. So let's all look for that issue when we get it in our mail. And as an added bonus, there's an article by our Carl Stuckey WCS committee co-chair, Renia Webb, about our club and about her WCS experience. So I hope you all will take the opportunity to take a look at that issue. If it doesn't arrive for some reason, let me know. Now, as far as guests go, yes, we have some terrific guests today. First, visiting Rotarian, past president of the Rotary Club of San Leandro, Diane Dorn. So welcome, Diane. Nice to have you with us again. We also have our friend, visiting Rotarian, I believe he's a past president of the Oakland Uptown Club, Frank Paré. So Frank, great to have you with us. And let's see, Carrie Hamill, yeah, she did bring a guest with us, with her today, Tricia Connors. So welcome, Tricia, nice to have you with us. And then Pamela and John Clausen brought a guest. Let's see if I can find her out there. Yeah, Ann Scott. So welcome, Ann, to our club. Welcome all our guests, and thank you for being with us today. And thank you, President Ces.
Thank you, Past President Ed. As I recapped for my first half of the year, I reminded you that we needed to work on membership. It's one of our areas that I must admit we have not performed as we had wished. So I remind all of you to challenge. I need everybody to bring in a new member. I need 35 to bring in new members to share what Rotary Service Above Self does for you. To that end, we are inducting a new member today. He will be introduced by President-elect Dudley Thompson with 2 interesting facts. Dudley.
Thank you, President Ces, fellow Rotarians. As with trying to get members, I'm going to say I've been trying to work on Scott Baird for about 5 years to join our club. And finally, he raised his hand and came on board. So I want you to welcome my friend, Scott Baird. Scott is the general manager of the Coast County's Peterbilt. So if you ever need to rent or lease a Peterbilt, Scott's the guy to go to. A couple interesting facts, although I have a third real quick, is next week our speaker is Alana, if I say that right. If she says so, she was a tennis player at Sac State. Scott was a tennis player at Sac State too. But 2 interesting facts. One is Scott is a really good golfer. And I'm very jealous of many of the golf courses that he's played at, whether it's from Monterey to Palm Springs to Phoenix. But the interesting fact is that Scott attended the last 2 Masters tournaments prior to COVID. The second interesting fact is Scott is a poker player. And, you know, he's ranked as if anybody, you poker players are familiar with the Hendon mob, he's ranked 186,483rd best poker player in the world. So, but the real claim to fame was he played in the World Series of Poker a few years ago. He's the guy that took Phil Gordon out and he finished 118th place. So welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Scott. We are happy that you have chosen to join us, and please know that your family and friends are always welcome to join us and to participate in our projects and events. By accepting membership, you have adopted our vision, which we have recited earlier, and you've also agreed to conduct your affairs according to the Rotary four-way test. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships, and will it be beneficial to all concerned? You will receive your Rotary pin, and hopefully you will wear it with pride and find pleasure and fulfillment by attending meetings, participating in service activities, practicing service above self, and by contributing to the Rotary Foundation and the Oakland Rotary Endowment. So now it's my pleasure, privilege, and honor to induct you as our newest member of the Rotary Club of Oakland. Let's give Scott a warm Rotary welcome.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Looking forward to working with y'all.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Rotarian Janice Brinkley, I believe you have a report to announce from Saroni Lena.
After I unmute myself, yes, I do. And thank you, President Ces, for giving me this opportunity to talk about something new from Saroni Lee Committee. Every year, our committee selects a limited number of Oakland high school students from low-income families to receive a scholarship to attend a 4-year college or university. This year, we're starting something new. We want to help our students find summer internships or jobs that can further their career goals. And where better to look than from our own Rotary community. These are truly impressive college students who have already accomplished so much in their young lives. I'm going to briefly introduce some of them to you. I'm not going to have time to go through all of them, so I'm going to be skipping around a bit. But you will be able to find this PowerPoint on Club Runner, and it has links to all their resumes or LinkedIn pages. Okay, Jesse, if we could go to the next slide. This is Vesna Sat, who is a junior at UC Merced, and Vesna hopes to find an internship in finance and or business. And I know we have many Rotary members in that field, those fields. Okay, you can go, if you could skip to number 4 now, Jesse. Thank you. This is Antoine Adams, who is a, oh, I might have messed this up. Okay, this is Antoine Adams, who is a sophomore at UCLA. And Antoine is interested in law, politics, government, and media public relations. I'm sorry, if you could go back up to the one before that. I think I have my numbers wrong here. Okay, this is Jose Sandoval, who is a junior at UCLA. And Jose is interested in real estate development and construction trades, law, criminal justice, law enforcement, government, education, and teaching. So very varied interest. Then if we could go to number 6. Okay, this is Amanda. Oh, this is, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay, Amanda Hun at Stanford University. And Amanda seeks an internship that will further her career goals of making technology more equitable and accessible to minorities. Admirable goal. And then if you could go to 7. This is Juliana Dang from UC Berkeley. Juliana is interested in finance, real estate, development and construction trades, marketing, government, nonprofit, social services, hospitality, and environmental engineering. I know there are Rotary members in probably all of those fields out there who could use an intern this summer. And then lastly, can we go to number 10? Here we go. Okay, this is Lily Tran, who's at UC, is a sophomore at UC Berkeley. And Lily is hoping for an internship in a clinical setting in healthcare and medicine. She would like to work with underserved communities. Okay, and then you could just skip to the last slide if you would, Jesse. Thank you. Our goal is to offer each and every one of our students a summer internship or job through the Rotary community. The internship should be paid at least minimum wage and be for a minimum of 20 hours a week and a minimum of 8 weeks during the summer. So please help us meet our goal. If you think you can offer an internship, please contact me. You'll see my email on the screen, or Steve Blair or Sam Miller. We're going to put together a spreadsheet for our students with internship opportunities and information on how to apply, or we can put you in touch with a specific one of our students if you're interested in talking with them about an internship. So please help us, I think, with our goal. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much for that, Janice. And just put it in the chat if you can. I see one has already put in the chat that they wanted to offer an internship to one of your students. So put it in chat or get in contact with the Cerrone Lena Scholarship Committee. Past President Peter could not be here to bring us an update on Housing Insecurity Task Force. However, we got Rotarian David Nave, who will listen closely and put the questions for our task force in, if any, in the chat box as he goes forward. David Nave, give us the update on the Housing Insecurity Task Force.
Good afternoon to all. Yeah, the team would like to update you on the Oakland Community Center Neighborhood OCN project. What we've accomplished and the things we haven't accomplished today, I'll briefly mention. I'll start with the non-accomplishments. The team's most important goal has not yet been met, seeking land, but much has been accomplished. The OCN, Oakland Community Neighborhood team, developed an advanced community village model. Selection of 2 sites have been done. Also, 2 capable third-party entities have been selected as possible managers for the sites. An RFQ was filed with the city in November, which meets all the specifications and qualifications. Importantly, after a year of meetings with representatives of the city, Caltrans, and other bodies, based on the favorable feedback, we know we have their support. So at the time the mayor does come through, hopefully, we know this will translate into support and action on the project. I'd like to briefly mention the issues. First, land, a prerequisite to the next step, mayor dependent. Another issue is children. Apparently, the state has restrictions on children in shelters. Children are the glue of the community and the heart of the matter for our village. And finally, budget. We realize it's a sensitive issue. The club will only be responsible for the CAPEX and first year operation. We are now, we have the elements of the budget, but until we have the land and can determine how many trailers we can put on it, we can calculate the revenue stream and the gap that we will present to the club. When we are done with this, we will have a meeting, and at that meeting, the club will determine what we call a go or no-go decision. Seeing Ces warm relationships with the mayor in the last meeting, we are confident that he will arrange a meeting for us, and we will bring glad tidings back to the club and make an extensive presentation on the project at that time. Thank you very much. It's nearly 11 p.m. here in Tel Aviv, and my eyes are closing. I apologize for the stuttering, etc. Have a good evening. Have a good day. Thank you.
We appreciate the update. We will stand by in case anybody has any questions that we have on the project. Basically, your project is to create a community village for homeless families, and we would it would operate somewhat similar to a kibbutz that you have over there in Israel.
Yeah.
And we want to try to find the land to get this operation off of the ground, get the city to give us some of the surplus land to identify it. We have pictures and slides of the whole program, I know, but if anybody has any questions or concerns about this program and how we're going to go on forward, we'll finally get the city to give us the land, and then we'll figure out how we do everything else in that from it. But if you got any questions, be sure to ask anyone from the Homeless Committee, Task Force Committee. That is Peter Sherris, our past president, is chairing that committee, along with David and John Clausen. So thank you so much for that update. If we don't have any other questions, I will go right on to Rotarian David Stein, who will do us the honor of introducing this week's Civic Thursday speaker.
President Ces, fellow Rotarians and guests, it's my honor to introduce Dave Metz. Dave is the president of Oakland-based polling firm FM3 Research. Dave has a bachelor's in government from a little school on the East Coast you may have heard of called Harvard University, and a master's from a more local institution, the Goldman School at UC Berkeley. Go Bears. Dave's been doing polling in Oakland for 23 years. He and the firm work for the city, for OUSD, for the Chamber of Commerce, for political candidates, ballot measures, and they also work for not-for-profits. Dave has a particular focus on environmental issues and climate change. In addition, Dave's done polling in all 50 states for candidates as well as ballot measures. Dave's here today to tell us, what are Oaklanders thinking, and can we trust polls? Please give a warm Rotary welcome to Dave Metz, president of FM3 Research.
The clap.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the gracious introduction, David, and thanks to all of you for the chance to be with you here today. I'm going to walk through some results of recent polling and talk a little bit about what Oaklanders think about what's going on in the city, their overall mood, their attitudes towards city government, and some of the changes that the community has faced over the course of the last few years. And I'm also going to step back for a minute at the end of the presentation, because as a pollster sharing polling data these days, I can't get too far into it before someone will ask me, well, wait a minute, can we even trust polls anymore? Who answers them? Do they ever get the results right for political races? And we have some thoughts on that I'll share, and then be happy to answer any questions that all of you have. So much of the data that I'm going to share today as it relates to the city of Oakland comes from the annual pulse survey conducted by the Oakland Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce. This is something the chamber has been doing going back at least a decade, where every fall we'll do a poll of local voters, ask about races that are up in upcoming elections, but also ask a series of questions about attitudes toward the city, which, because they've been asked over time, we've got a pretty good barometer of how public opinion in Oakland has been shifting. So a lot of the data I'll share today comes from that survey, which was conducted at the very end of October, right before the election. It was a mix of phone and online interviews. We talked to just over 600 likely voters citywide. We've also done a range of other surveys over the course of the last year, as David referenced, for the school district, for the city, and for a number of other clients. And I'll mix in some references to that research as well as we go through the data. So first, one of the questions that we ask people many times in the Pulse survey is to give us 2 or 3 words that they think best describe Oakland. And one of the things that really jumps out from Oaklanders' perspectives on the city is the degree to which they value its diversity. Any way we ask the question, that is absolutely central to what they think makes Oakland a good place to live, a vibrant place to live. And it's part of the reason that they're so committed to the city. This doesn't mean that they don't see some things that are concerns about it. You'll see, for example, the degree to which homelessness is referenced as one of the first things people think about when they think about Oakland. But the diversity is really the thing that stands out the most. Now, as much as there are many things people love about the city, we have seen over the course of the last couple of years a real shift towards some concerns about the direction in which the city is moving. One of the standard questions that pollsters begin their surveys with is to ask people if they think things in their community are headed in the right direction or off on the wrong track. And you'll see here data dating back 2 decades in Oakland in terms of people's perceptions of the direction of the city. And while starting in 2014, we had majorities or pluralities of Oaklanders who thought the city was headed in the right direction, over the last 2 years, we've seen a slim majority who believe the city is on the wrong track. I will note, we saw this in 2019 as well as 2020. So this predates the pandemic and the economic downturn, and suggests that a lot of those concerns are focused on a range of issues that predate the negative impact that the pandemic has had. And I'll talk about what some of those issues are in a few moments. This is not to say in any way, though, that Oaklanders have given up on the city or are completely pessimistic about the direction in which it is headed. We, in each year's survey, read people a list of emotions that might describe how people feel about living in Oakland, and ask them to pick up to 2 that best characterize how they feel about the future of the city. And you'll see here a mix of positive and negative sentiments. We've got sizable numbers of Oaklanders who describe themselves as hopeful or optimistic about the city, while at the same time we have another sizable subgroup that describe themselves as concerned, uncertain, frustrated, or disappointed. And that mix of sentiments, and it's certainly the case that many voters hold both of those at once, I think feed into some of that anxiety we're seeing about the city's overall direction. So what are some of the issues that contribute to these feelings? And as I say, many of them are things that predated the pandemic. We offered the respondents in this year's survey a list of issues facing Oakland and asked them to rate each as either an extremely, very, somewhat, or not a serious problem facing the city. And we've ranked them here by the proportion that rate them as either extremely or very serious problems. You'll see those numbers running down the right-hand side. And there is a wide range of issues that Oaklanders are highly concerned about. Everything on this list, at least 7 and 10 rate as a very serious problem. That obviously includes both the economic and health impacts of the coronavirus, as well as unemployment, issues that are new to the list this year, but also many that have been pretty persistent. Homelessness, homeless encampments, a lack of housing middle-income families can afford, the cost of living, the cost of rent. These concerns, many of which center around housing and its expense, have been concerns for Oaklanders for quite a while. And as we move down the list and look at the lower tier of issues that Oaklanders are concerned about, you'll see a number of others that are sort of at that same level of intensity as the prior slide, including displacement, racial and economic inequality. And then you'll see a few others that perhaps have dropped down a little bit as public concerns this year. Traffic congestion, one of the few silver linings of the pandemic, of course, has been that there are fewer cars on the road, which was a major headache for Oaklanders previously. And then issues around growth and development, which have been contentious in the city. Relatively fewer Oaklanders are now saying that either too much development or too little development are major problems. So here you'll see the way that concern about a number of these issues has shifted over the course of the last few years. This year's survey was post-pandemic, the others were pre-pandemic. Unemployment has skyrocketed as a concern, not surprisingly, whereas traffic congestion, as I noted before, has dropped dramatically. Most other issues are in about the same place, which I think sort of contributes to that consistency of sentiment that we've seen over the course of the last couple of years. And I do want to note, especially when it comes to these issues around housing, that this is not a concern that is unique to Oakland. It is something that is shared by all Californians. This is a question we asked in a poll statewide at the end of last year that I found very striking. How confident are you that ran to the same community you 19 indicate that they're confident that their kids or grandkids could live here. Only 3% are very confident. And in just the last 2 years, those numbers have been cut in half, from 39% 2 years ago to 19% now. So this is something that's really reached a critical level of anxiety for Californians and for Oaklanders. Now, all of this means that we've had a fair amount of churn within the city's political system over the course of the last couple of elections. When we ask people whether they think that how they would rate the city council's ability to work productively with one another, only 15% rated as excellent or good, only 31% rated as even only fair. And that sentiment has been pretty consistent over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. In a range of other surveys, we've seen majorities indicating that they disapprove of the performance of city government. Again, I think just a reflection of their frustration with some of these intractable problems. But what that's led to over the course of the last couple of election cycles, in a city where frankly, many people don't know their council member's name or pay a lot of attention to what's going on in city government, is a fair amount of turnover, where we've seen incumbent council members, a couple of years ago, Abel Guillen and Desley Brooks, and then this year, Lynette Gibson McElhenney being defeated, in some cases by wide margins. And that sort of discomfort among the electorate, I think we're really seeing its political impact starting to make itself felt. One of the issues about which there is rising concern is also public safety. Another question that we've asked in a wide range of surveys over the last few years is whether people feel safer or less safe in Oakland than they did a year or two ago. And you'll see that red line moving up steadily over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, to a point where we now have 3 times as many Oaklanders who say they feel less safe than they did a few years ago, as say they feel safer. And that same trend is evident when we ask people about their neighborhood specifically, not just about the city as a whole. It's not as acute, but the same trend is there, with, by a double-digit margin, more Oaklanders saying they feel less safe in their neighborhood as opposed to more safe than they did a couple of years ago. We've also asked people about how they feel about the city's economic progress, in terms of how they feel about the current rate of economic growth in the city, and how they feel about Oakland as a place to start a business. And you'll see here that while we've got right now right around a third who rate the city's economy as either excellent or good, there definitely was a spike in negative sentiments this year, again, due to the economic downturn. But the trend we've seen here, where the level of anxiety is rising, again, held true even before 2020. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with concern about income inequality and the cost of living, and perceptions that that is hindering economic activity to some degree. At the same time, people do appreciate that Oakland is a place that large companies want to locate, want to base themselves, and potentially some even coming to Oakland. 74% believe that's good for the economy because it creates jobs and tax revenue. And that's, I think, given the more acute economic concern we're facing now and the cuts that are confronting local budgeters, that's something that most Oaklanders continue to embrace. So how is it in this environment that Oaklanders are learning about what's going on in city government? Given all of the changes and the tumult that we've been facing, we asked respondents to tell us which of a number of different sources of information was the main way they get information about city government in Oakland. And as you'll see here, the top response, and respondents could pick more than one item from this list. Most people get news from multiple sources. But social media was the primary source of information. More than 1/3 of Oaklanders named it as their primary source of information about city government, followed by television news and then newspapers, either the East Bay Times or the Chronicle. This was not the case 5 or 10 years ago. Social media has really skyrocketed up the list in terms of its importance as a place for people to get information, at the same time that local daily newspapers have become less critical. That dynamic, I think, also probably has shaped the way that political campaigns in the city have played out over the course of the last couple of years. So that's a snapshot of what we're seeing in Oakland from polling. The next question obviously becomes, is polling a good barometer to figure out what people are thinking? And I have to say, over the course of the last couple of election cycles, I have found that the number of members of the public who are interested in polling and sort of want to know what's going under the hood, how it's done, and how accurate it is as a representation of public opinion has really gone up. And especially with the results of the 2016 election, and then some of the state races for president and some of the Senate contests in this year's election, where the consensus of the polls was somewhat different than what the results looked like, those questions have been becoming more acute. Because of that, we've started adding to some of our polls statewide in California some questions about how much attention people pay to polling. We asked this in 2018 and 2020, and what you'll see is there is an enormous degree of focus on polls that really hasn't changed over the course of the last couple of years. Almost 3 in 5 Californians say they read the results of political polls at least a few times a week. Now, we didn't even think to ask this question 10 years or 20 years ago, but I guarantee you it would have been a much smaller proportion of voters who are this closely attuned to polling. And yet, as much attention as they pay to it, they tend to lack confidence that polling is an accurate barometer of where public opinion lies. As you'll see here in 2018, we had only 31% who said they told us this, and this is Californians, who told us they think public opinion polls accurately reflect what the public thinks most of the time. That was, of course, in the wake of what happened in 2016. In 2020, those numbers had not in any way recovered. It's only 29% that tell us they think polling is an accurate barometer of what the public thinks. But at the same time, they're reading it on a regular basis. So they're skeptical about it, but they're also addicted to the numbers. And that obviously is, I think, causing a fair amount of public frustration. So what happened in this year's election? In 2016, there were some problems with presidential polling, but they were pretty localized. It was mainly in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And our industry took a look at the polls after the election and concluded that there was an underrepresentation of non-college educated white voters, especially in rural areas, that understated Trump's performance. And so in 2018, we all adjusted our polling models to reflect that and had, generally speaking, a pretty good election cycle where poll results tended to predict the outcomes of races with a pretty good degree of accuracy. In this year's election, however, and while I would note that we're only getting some of the final election results in now, and comparing them back to the polls is going to be an ongoing process over the next couple of months, there were both hits and misses. The polling in Georgia was very accurate, both in the presidential election and then in the recent Senate runoffs as well. But there were some places where it was wildly off. In Maine, Susan Collins did not lead a single public poll after the middle of the summer, was trailing by an average of 7 points and ended up winning by 9. There is just nothing that can explain that except some sort of fundamental miss in polling methodologies. And I think there's a couple of other states where we saw similar misses. So to the degree we've looked at the data so far, what this tends to suggest to us is, one, the problems do seem to be more localized to a handful of states, more geographically dispersed than in 2016, but still not everywhere. California polling, by and large, was spot on, both at the state and local levels. Polls that rely on one mechanism for reaching people, either only calling people on the phone or only polling people online, seem to be less productive or less accurate than polls that mix modes and have a diverse set of ways of reaching out to people. It's likely that the polls this time were too conservative in the way they estimated voter turnout. Both on the left and on the right, there were historic numbers of voters who showed up. And while some expected that on the left, given discontent with the president, it also seems to have been a pretty good year for turnout on the right. Latinx voters, particularly in Florida and Texas, polling may not have adequately captured the diversity of sentiment within those communities. And whether it's because of sampling or lack of Spanish language interviewing, there's a number of reasons that may have gone into that. But the latter two issues that you'll see on this slide are the ones that I think are the biggest concern for our industry and the ones that I suspect have the greatest influence. There is a theory that's gotten a lot of discussion about so-called shy Trump voters, people who were supportive of Donald Trump, but hesitant to acknowledge that to a pollster because presumably they thought there was some sort of social stigma attached to supporting Donald Trump. That really doesn't seem to be the case. And, as a Democratic pollster, I can tell you, whenever we've had focus groups or interviewed people who are Trump supporters, most of them are not shy about expressing it. And in many parts of the country, there's as much of a social stigma on supporting Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton as there is on Donald Trump. But what may have happened is that voters who were supportive of Donald Trump were less likely to respond to public opinion surveys. The skepticism they have about institutions writ large in American society, government, business, labor unions, the media, may have also meant that they were skeptical about pollsters and therefore just declined to answer the phone and talk to them. So even if pollsters are disciplined about making sure we interview enough Republicans or enough non-college educated white voters, the ones that are talking to us may be psychographically different from those who are opting out of participation. And that may have understated support for Trump. Conversely, during the pandemic, people who work in jobs that are information centered, who could easily work from home, and that disproportionately includes people who live in cities in blue states and more progressive voters, may have been more likely to respond to polls. They're at home, they have the ability to do it, and they're eager to share their opinions. And so we might have overrepresented voters who were more anti-Trump in polling. Figuring this out is going to be really critically important to making sure polling is on a good footing for the future, because it really does come down to who chooses to participate and who doesn't choose to participate in polls. And if there's an ideological skew there, it can be very hard to correct for. One final data point that I'll share with you on this note, in a statewide poll we conducted the week of the election last year, we included a question where we asked people who were responding to our poll, why'd you decide to talk to us today? What was it that made you agree to participate in a poll? And they answered the question in their own words, and you'll see the top responses here. A lot of them are pretty encouraging in terms of suggesting that people see participation in polling as socially beneficial. Making your voice heard, making sure that the data is accurate, having the ability to understand what people think. But you'll see that a lot of these responses are also ones that are a little bit more sort of ad hoc and rely on sort of luck or coincidence. People saying that they like the sound of the pollster's voice, didn't want to be rude and hang up, happened to have time on their hands. I've shown here just some examples of the kinds of things people told us in their own words were the reasons why they decided to participate in a poll. And while some of them are high-minded and reflect an impressive degree of civic engagement, a lot of them do reflect just the sort of random nature of who may be available to answer a poll on a given night. So all of these are things that our industry is going to have to grapple with as we move forward to make sure that we can continue to provide accurate data. As I say, here in California and in Oakland, I think the polling performed pretty well and pretty accurately, but we're going to have to continue to be aware of the changing ways that Americans communicate to make sure that polling can keep up with them. All right, so with that, I will pause there. I'm happy to answer any questions about data from Oakland, the practice of polling, or any questions that folks have about research at all.
And I do believe we have a few questions for you.
Yeah.
Susie, are you going to?
We do, yes. So the first question is from David Stein, and his question is, are Oaklanders in favor of taxing big business more, and how does that relate to the desire to bring big business to town?
Yeah. Generally speaking, in most polling that we've done, and I'll just take the slides down here for the near term, we have seen great willingness to support higher levels of taxes on business, particularly the larger and more profitable businesses. And I think for most voters, they reconcile that by saying, it's great that we have businesses that are profitable. It's good for our economy. We want them here in Oakland, but the ones that are doing well, judging by the performance of the stock market, can afford to pay a little more. You know, we had a sort of a test of this with Proposition 15, which was on the ballot statewide this year, tended to perform very, very well in blue areas and in big cities in the state. I don't know what the numbers were exactly in Oakland, but I suspect it got a pretty solid margin of approval. Now, we are at a period of unique changes and shifts in our politics. And if we enter a more sustained economic downturn, the way that the public thinks about this calculus may start to change.
Okay.
Stephanie Cosenza is asking, is it difficult to get Oaklanders to participate in polls, either written or by phone?
Yes, it can be. I mean, I don't think it's any more difficult for Oaklanders than it is for Americans in general. Response rates to polls, it used to be that, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, basically 1 out of every 3 respondents would agree to talk to you and be interviewed. And that rate has plummeted to now a point where it's less than 5%. Some of this has to do with changes in technology. People don't have landline phones. They have wireless phones that have caller ID, and they may be less likely to pick it up. As people spend more time texting, I think any of us who have teenage children know that they will respond to a text quickly, but very rarely answer their phones. And there's also, frankly, just more people who are suspicious of polling. We talked about that a little bit a few moments ago. Oakland does pose, I guess, in some ways, some greater challenges just because it is such an incredibly diverse community. It's multicultural, it's multilingual, has a large number of renters, people who may be moving from one address to another more often. And all of those things create some more logistical challenges for pollsters. But being aware of them, there's ways we can adjust for it and still get a good sample. I would say that overall, the main challenges we're facing are not unique to Oakland, but are ones that are really nationwide.
Lowe has a question. If the polls across the country over the last 4 years, last 3 elections have been accurate in African-American polling, but not with white Americans, what does that mean about the issue of honesty and race relations?
What I would say is, to the extent that it's not so much that the polling is accurate among African Americans or among white Americans. It's simply that the samples in some cases did not include enough of those non-college educated whites. It wasn't that the people pollsters were talking to weren't telling them the truth. It was just that they weren't talking to enough of them to have a sample that matched the population of people who showed up to vote. And the reason that a lot of that happened was in 2008 and 2012, we had phenomenal turnout among communities of color that was largely inspired by Barack Obama's being on the ballot. And that fell off dramatically in 2016. So I am hopeful. I don't think there's much evidence that respondents, regardless of race or ethnicity, are not telling us the truth when we talk to them. But the burden really is on pollsters to make sure that we're talking to a diverse and representative sample, that enough voters of all backgrounds are included in our polls. And to the extent that we've had challenges over the last few years, I think that's really where it's come.
And Cynthia Harris's question is, well, first she wants to thank you for sharing such pertinent polling information. And she wants to know, how is this data systematically captured?
Yeah, so I mean, just a little bit about the methodology we use for polling voters in Oakland. So we start by drawing a sample of registered voters off the voter registration database that the city and county maintain. We take people who have a history of having voted in prior elections or are newly registered to vote to make sure that we're sampling people who are active voters and not those whose names may be on the list, but perhaps they've moved, they've died, or they've stopped participating in elections. And based on the information on the voter file, we know a lot about voters. We know their age, their gender, their political party registration, their exact address, how frequently they have voted, what language they like to get their ballot materials in. And on that basis, we can target the voters that we're interviewing and essentially make sure that the proportions of voters we talk to in a poll align with the proportions of voters in those demographic categories that we know are likely to vote. And that process helps us to get poll results that align with the opinions of the broader electorate. In Oakland, as we've discussed, to do that rigorously, you need to reach out to people in multiple ways. We often do calls to landline phones, calls to wireless phones, text messages to encourage people to respond to an online survey, as well as emailed invitations. And you need to be patient and persistent. It used to be that we might be able to knock out a poll in 2 or 3 nights. These days, sometimes you need to take a week to really give people time to sort of call them back, chase them down, find them at a time when it's convenient for them to answer. But combining all those techniques, we can ensure that we've got the most representative possible sample.
There are a couple of comments in here, just, with the information you provided, that it would be interesting to get a little bit more drill down to understand the residents who don't feel safe, why they don't feel safe, and what those segments are.
Absolutely. I think, one of our challenges here is I was trying to pack a lot of data into a 15 or 20 minute talk. This is a small fraction of the data that the chamber collects as part of its pulse survey, which includes a lot of demographic breakdowns about the responses to those questions. If you'd like to get a deeper background or sort of go more in depth into any of these numbers, reach out to Barbara Leslie at the chamber, and they are often happy to share their data.
If you know, David, why don't you just tell us? Really want to know what the issue is with the people, why the people feel unsafe.
Okay, on that, I'm sorry. I thought the question was sort of about the data more broadly, but on the safety issues, generally what the data is showing is it is disproportionately lower income communities and communities of color, where we're seeing higher levels of concern about safety. In sharing this with some city officials, they look at the data and say, well, I'm not sure that dramatic increase in perceptions of unsafety is really justified by the objective data about crime rates. But we've had other people say, if you are hearing the sound of gunshots in your neighborhood, it doesn't really matter what the objective data say, you're going to have that feeling that you're not as safe. And those perceptions are ones that, that's what drives the numbers here. It's perception more than it is reality. And I think that's a big part of it.
David Nave, I don't see your question, but I see your hand up. Do you have something?
I did send it. Okay,
Yes.
my question was, isn't social media combined with algorithms like artificial intelligence more high fidelity than polling in today's world?
As a way of understanding what people think, I don't think so. Those of us who are involved in politics and policy, for example, spend a lot of time looking what's happening on Twitter. Only about 20% of Americans use Twitter. And they are disproportionately younger. They are disproportionately more affluent, more highly educated. Their Facebook and Instagram and other social media have greater reach, but you still need to have a computer. You need to have digital technology to access it. And so, the share of people who have access to that technology, it's not everybody. And they're not demographically the same as the people who don't. And so that's why, again, I think having a mix of modes to reach out to people, both online and on the phones, helps you to get a sort of a bigger and better picture, and certainly bigger than what we would get just through social media.
One last question, Susie.
Okay, so let me see. We've got one from, I think there's a couple here. David Kirsten, I'm curious Any data was taken on whether voters see a connection between defunding the police and rising crime rates?
Yes, we didn't explore that thoroughly in the Oakland survey, but we have in others. And this issue is one that is obviously incredibly complex to explore from both a policy and a political perspective. The Oakland voters actually, on balance, support the notion of defunding the police as just using that language by a slim margin. But at the same time, we also have a plurality of Oaklanders who say that they want more police on the streets as opposed to less. And when we ask about the idea of reallocating funding from having armed police officers respond to every call that comes into the police and versus having responses to certain kinds of police calls come from other trained professionals who may not be armed police, and allocating more funding in that direction, Oaklanders support that broadly. And those trends are pretty similar to what we see in California. There is less support overall statewide for defunding the police as a concept. But the thing that I take away from all of the data on this issue is that it is incredibly complicated, that the public's feelings are sort of contradictory, and that just asking people about a slogan or a phrase doesn't really capture the depth of their feelings about what the right approach to policing is. And it requires a much more in-depth conversation to get a true handle on their sentiments. And unfortunately, our political discourse doesn't lend itself to that very much. But the budget process does. And I think these are things that the city is going to be dealing with in its upcoming budget deliberations in a lot of detail.
Thank you, David Metz, for being our speaker for today. Let's give him a round of applause and clap it like this or this.
My pleasure. Thank you all.
This year, our club is making homeless crisis in Oakland a priority. To that end, and as our gift to you for being our speaker for the day, in your honor, we are making a donation to support our unhoused residents in Oakland. Additionally, we would like to give you our Centennial book, which documents 100 years of service and friendship in the third oldest club in the Rotary world. Again, thank you for being our speaker today.
Thank you very much.
Rotarian Alex Polson, I believe you have an announcement.
Next Thursday, January 21st at 5:30 p.m., join us for Cocktails with the President. You'll have another trivia-packed quiz on presidential trivia. You'll learn many things you did not realize. Thursday, next week, January 21st, 5:30 p.m. Look for the Club Runner email.
All right, thank you. Rotarian David Kirsten, will you tell us about our speaker for next week?
Yes, President Ces, I'm pleased to announce that Idelina Kirkness, a social media star and expert, accomplished speaker, is going to be presenting an educational segment next week on how to leverage social media. Idelina has taught me so much about social media, along with a lot of the people I work with in Oakland, so I'm excited to have her speak to the club. She regularly gives talks on how to leverage social media to accomplish her goals and build influence. She's also an Oakland native and alumni of Bishop O'Dowd, where she played #1 on the varsity tennis team and earned a full ride tennis scholarship to Sacramento State with a team of top international players. I will put a link to a video that we put together on how her successful tennis career translated into her great business success. And it's a very nice biographical piece that I think is inspiring to the community. And it tells really a unique story that she has to share with the club about why she does what she does. You can connect with her on LinkedIn, Instagram. I'll put those links, and she just has a lot of value to bring. And she's very excited to bring this talk and this information to the club to help the club influence folks in all the good things that it does on social media platforms.
So good. Maybe I can learn how to be an influencer.
Exactly.
Some of you other members that may as well. Thank you, Pat, for the thought for the day. Thank you, Charlie, for the MLK reprise. Welcome our newest member, Scott. And thank you, Janice, for introducing the Cerrone Lena internship efforts. Thank you, David, for bringing us up to date on the homeless effort. And thank you, David Stein, for introducing our speaker. Jesse, before I wrap up, do we have any bell ringers?
We do have 5 bell rings today. Stephen Blair rang a bell for Janice and her Cerrone Lena presentation. Fred Morse rang a bell for the same thing, Janice and her Cerrone Lena presentation. Joyce E. Mack rang a bell for the MLK presentation from Charlie. And Marie rang the bell twice, one for MLK Day and one for Thai Pongal celebration.
Wow, isn't that wonderful? Bell ringers are always good, and it's good to recognize a fellow Rotarian. So I'd like to end this meeting as we always do, and that's the way it went at the 5,323rd Club meeting on January 14, 2021 at Oakland Rotary number 3, the 3rd oldest Rotary Club in the world. Everyone remember, Rotary opens opportunity for service above self. And for now, this meeting of the Rotary Club of Oakland is adjourned.